Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Ramadan Mubarak. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the Healthy Muslim in Ramadan. We've been discussing the traditions of medicine available at the time of the Prophet. And I hope I've convinced you that the people of that time were very, very intelligent and sophisticated. And considering how late it was, literally over a millennia later, that the West started to understand their ideas, they were what might be called, to put it mildly, ahead of their time. They understood hygiene, they understood the principle of diet, they understood nutrition, they understood specific treatments. There is a huge compendium, please explore it for yourself, of very specific dua and very specific treatments for different conditions. And there is wisdom in using these, because really, is modern medicine the answer? A bit of it is, but be judicious in what you accept. And please do not assume that just because we're a computer literate and technologically sophisticated world, that we know better than the knowledge at the time of the Prophet. I'm really happy to see that there's a resurgence of interest in traditional healing and in the use particularly of the early herbal and medical treatments. I don't think there's a single Muslim program that does not have advertisements for black seed oil or black seed in its purity, which is a mustard seed. And the Prophet said it's a cure for every disease except death. There's just one thing I'd like to ask the people who make black seed oil. Could you try to make it taste a little bit better than engine oil? It's really difficult to take much more than a few drops of it. And for it to work properly, I'm told you've got to take a lot. Even though I really, really wanted to be cured from cancer, I found chemotherapy a lot easier to take than black seed oil. I'm sorry about that. I'd like to move on to the development from this rich traditional theme into what became early Islamic medicine. Now, after the death of the Prophet, peace be upon him, the Ummah travelled, and as we know, there was a conquest of many countries. The history of this is fascinating. A historian said to me, of course, it wasn't a religious conversion. It's just that the purity of the Muslims at that time was such that you could trust your money with them. And most of the other communities were rogues and bandits. And the Muslim Ummah would impose taxes on anybody who didn't convert to Islam. So it was easier to convert because then you didn't have to pay the tax. Whatever. There was a massive, massive spread of Islam. Islam spread as far as China and as far as Spain and all the bits in between. So to Persia, to India, to the further Arab countries. And 2 centuries after the time of the Prophet, by that time the Muslim community had absorbed the rich traditions of medical training, medical understanding of all of these communities. There was travel, there was a lot of writing by the scribes. Printing press hadn't been invented yet, but the traditions were very freely available, written in Arabic. And the Arabs themselves translated the works of the Greeks and the Indians and the Chinese. So this was a sophisticated group of people. I'd like to tell you just about the life of one person. To give you an idea of what a physician was in those days, he's one of the great founders of modern medicine. We call him Averroes. His real name was Ibn Sina, Abu Ali al-Hussein ibn Abdallah ibn Sina. Lived 980 to 1037. Only lived 50 years. It's not much. He was born in Gurgan near the Caspian Sea. And he devoted himself at that time. He was born at a time where he was living, there were many other cultures and religions that he was exposed to, so that even by the age of 10 he was Hafiz of Quran, but he was being taught mathematics, jurisprudence, and a very wide cultural knowledge. In all of this, he became fascinated by medicine and started learning at the age of 12. By 16, he was treating his first patients. By 20, he was called to the Emperor of Bukhara, who he treated and cured, and became the court doctor. This gave him access to the library of the emperor, and he spent his day treating patients and his night reading in the library. By the end of his life, he had written 200 books. I think that's what's called a productive life. He devoted himself to studying the texts, both the originals and the commentaries, in the natural sciences, metaphysics, and his skill as a physician was influenced by a wide knowledge of other sciences. And he admitted himself that the treatments he was administering could not be described, they could only be learnt from practice. He knew you cannot learn medicine from a computer. And yet, in the 21st century, that's precisely what we're doing. It's so sad. He wrote, the most famous of his books was something called the Kunun, or the Canon of Medicine. It's a formidable book. It was not only descriptive but analytical, and it drew on theoretical principles behind health and disease. It was also extremely self-critical. It asked a lot of questions. It was one of the first of the Arab books to be translated into Latin, and it was the first book on health to be printed in 1472. The Greek texts were not printed until 1499, Galen not until 1525. But of course, his work encompassed all the knowledge of the Greeks. This book, the Canon of Ibn Sina, was in use until the 17th century. And there is a renaissance of interest in his work. Important thing is he was a philosopher. He wanted to rid medicine of superstitious and turn it into a science, make it based on empirical observation, objectivity, and rationalism. He was the founder of holistic medicine. He did not believe that the same infection would be manifest in two different people. He understood that there's a very rich response from different people because so many things are different from one person to another. He wrote on the prevention of disease and on the preservation of health. It is fascinating that he understood that the beginning of illness is at a cellular level. For many of the earlier traditions, the thought was that something comes from outside and influences the body. He understood that illness starts from within. And we understand, of course, now that it is the mitochondria of the cell that is weak and either turns into malignancy or is proved to be sensitive to infection, and is the key to health and illness. So billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars, and over 1,000 years later, we've only rediscovered what he knew at that time. 20th century medicine has become reductionist. We treat the disease and not the person. Even what's called personalized medicine, you might have heard this term. You think, at last, they're getting back to understand that Harry and Maggie are different. No, it's not about that. They're not treating the human personality. They're not looking at the robustness or fragility of the individual who has the illness. What they're talking about is genomic medicine. In other words, what are the genes involved in your malignancy or your infection, and how can we influence your genes? I want you to come back after the break, because the wisdom of our foremost Muslim physician must be preserved today. You've got a lot to hear about. Please come back. Welcome back. We were talking about my hero, the first Islamic physician, Ibn Sina, known as Avicenna, who was really the father of modern medicine. I'm always interested in the character of people, and this extraordinary man was not a perfect human being. He was obsessional. He was a perfectionist. He was hard on the people around him because he wanted things done the way he wanted them. And he did not trust easy. If you didn't do it right, he was quick to anger. He was somewhat self-confident, perhaps because he was very handsome. But what comes across is the driving, clear-sighted nature of his quest for knowledge, and the quest for that knowledge to be applied in the understanding of mankind, to enable mankind to be strong. The books he wrote, of the 200 books he wrote, they weren't all on medicine. Some were on theology, metaphysics, astronomy, physics, poetry, philosophy. These things were important to the doctor. The doctor was not expected to be a scientist who just dealt in medicine. He was expected to know about everything. But his work was extraordinary. He introduced, way before the 18th century, we're talking about the 1st century, the first book on psychopharmacology. An entire work based on the herbal remedies and medicines that could be used to affect people who were agitated, who were tired, who were depressed, who had strange thoughts, who had... There were lots of ways, and rather sophisticated ways, of describing emotional pain in its various manifestations. He talked about the origin of grief and the sadness associated with it, and pathological grief, people who could not get over their losses and return to a normal life, and ways of helping them. He understood absolutely the effect of a disordered mind on the body. He used, of course, some of the knowledge that was contained in the Greek and Roman tradition, but improved on it from his own understanding. He wrote a primer on medicine of the elderly. The care and the detail and the sweetness with which he observes the frailty of the elderly and the ways we need to help them to be comfortable, to be safe, and to be well. This shows a person who, in spite of the fact that he was self-confident and arrogant, he certainly did not lack compassion. His knowledge of holistic medicine was profound, and he incorporated what was already known at the time of the Prophet, certainly recorded by Ali, the 6 requirements for health: fresh, clean air, food and drink, movement and rest, sleep and wakefulness, eating and exercise, and a healthy mental state. When did you last go to your doctor? Us brilliant, brilliant physicians in the 21st century, and have the doctor detail: what is the state of air in your building? Do you have an open window? If so, what's the air like outside? What are you eating and drinking, and when do you eat, and how do you eat? Are you in a hurry? Do you eat your sandwich on the run? Does your doctor ever ask that anymore? I don't think so. How much does your doctor know about what you do with your day in detail, not just in general? How do you take your rest in the evening? Do you arrive home at 1 o'clock and crash, or do you gently rest in the evening? When do you do your exercise? What kind of exercise do you do? Do you play sports? Do you row? Are you involved with riding? I mean, does your doctor know? I don't think so. That's how ignorant we've become. He studied digestion in minute detail. The way that these physicians observed the physiology of digestion was rediscovered by Claude Bernard in France in the 18th century, without reference, sadly, to the canon of Avicenna. But its importance was known then. And even though it was rediscovered, the knowledge has been lost since then. And he introduced disease concepts. And the disease concepts stemmed from his understanding of the unhealthy cell and the different patterns of unhealth of different cells. But with this knowledge, he had a detailed guidance for how an individual can remain healthy. Please get a translation of his book, read that section and apply it. It is meticulously detailed. He advises on exercise, a wide variety of different kinds of exercises, what to do: fast exercises, strength exercises, exercises on water, exercises on horseback riding, etc. And exactly when you should do them. Specific exercises for different kinds of people. Massage, bathing, temperature, whether you're the person who should have cold bathing or somebody else should have hot. The importance of cold bathing to provide protection from immunity, for your immunity. That was rediscovered 50 years ago by somebody who proudly announced that it was his invention. Sorry, it wasn't. The importance of hot-cold distraction in the treatment of injured limbs, rediscovered. But we don't attribute it to him. It's all crystal clear. The temperature of what you drink, what should it be? Should it be very cold? Should it be intermediate? Should it be hot? What time of day are we talking about? What is the ambient temperature of your room? Have you eaten or haven't you eaten? Are you going out or not going out? All of this is described in detail. Do we care? No wonder we get sick. The details of food, the details of your sleep-wake balance, and the treatment of fatigue, all of these contained in wise advice on how to remain healthy. I'm going to stop talking to my patients. I'm just going to replicate this and give it to them. I've decided to do that right now. And I think my patients will be very healthy. They won't come to see me, and then I can retire, which will be nice. I've obviously been not keeping them well, which is my fault, because I haven't understood the wisdom of Ibn Sina. He treated travellers. He understood about travel medicine and what people needed to do in journeys to different countries. Then when you get to his examination of the body, ooh, that makes me embarrassed. The way he describes the human pulse. Maybe he drew some of that from China, but I promise you, we've lost the talent. But we've invented a machine that can count it. At least we can do that. Ibn Sina could read everything from your pulse. He explains how to examine the human body in other ways. It is amazing. And I've got to rediscover it in more details. I've recently returned to this because a good English translation has only just become available. It's important to really respect Ibn Sina as an example of the excellence of what early Islam was all about. What we see of the Islamic Ummah in the 21st century is a very sad, pale reflection of what it was in those times. They were the leaders of the world. They drew from the Greeks, they drew from the Romans, and improved on those traditions. They absorbed the traditions of India and China. They were the kings. They were wise. Remember, we're talking about the first century. England was a completely tribal country, and people painted themselves in blue and lived in grass huts and had no concept whatsoever of any of these practices. Medicine in the West started in Europe in about the 18th century, really. The modern medicine as we understand it. In America, in the 1910, doctors could just get an arts degree and call themselves doctors. There was no science to it at all. Johns Hopkins University, founded by an Irishman, rather strange bachelor who'd made money on the railroads. He sent the Americans to Europe to study and come back, and he founded scientific medicine in America. But this was 8 centuries after Avicenna. As Muslims, we must go back to his knowledge because it contains the knowledge of the Prophet. Thank you for being with us. Please come to our next talk.